Oh. It's you. Hello. And welcome back to another edition of the Kino Corner, starring me. You see, Kino is no longer with us. Mr. Kino Man has quite the sweet tooth and decided one day to try all the different flavors of the Flintstone vitamins. Needless to say, mixing such a deadly combination together has led to his absence. They're not so sweet now, are they? Kino recorded something personal for me before he passed, and if you don't mind right now, I'm going to listen to it for a little bit. Not that.
Following the production of Pete's Dragon, David Lowery used a portion of his Disney paycheck to fund and create his most personal film to date, A Ghost Story. Filmed in secret in Dallas, and for only a budget of about $100,000, A Ghost Story was a small film that Lowery didn't expect to succeed, but he made anyway. It opened at Sundance, and A24 bought the rights to the film, instantly assuring that every upper-middle-class white person between the ages of 16 and 35 would love the movie. Hence, it saw some success, and has garnered a bit of a cult following. But, how was it made, and what does it mean? I know you might be thinking, Kino, $100,000? No way! It's got Casey Affleck and Rooney Mara in it, not to mention special effects and house destruction. Well, let me remind you that Affleck and Mara had worked with Lowery previously on the pretty great film Ain't Them Bodies Saints. Lowery also called in some help from the effects supervisor of Pete's Dragon. So if there's anything to learn from this, it's that it can be pretty useful to have celebrity friends. But what about the house? We're gonna have to backtrack a little bit, all the way to pre-production. Obviously, it's a bit difficult to afford to buy a house and completely decimate it when your budget is only $100,000. But what Lowery and his team did was scout out condemned houses that were scheduled for demolition. They found what would become the picture house in pretty bad condition, needless to say. Some of the shots from the test shoot made it into the film, so you can see how the house looked before they spruced it up. The house next to it was also condemned, so they used that house to hold all the gear and art department stuff, since they had to regularly redress the picture house. And in the main house, they really did elevate it to being kind of livable. I mean, some of the crew members actually did live in that house during the shoot. But it was just a happy little accident that both houses were scheduled for destruction. So when the shooting and the reshooting was done, the filmmakers let the right authorities know that it was time for a little bit of what I like to call
ultimate destruction.
The whole demolition of the house lasted 15 minutes. That's probably as long as this video is going to be. So think about it. By the time you finish watching this video, a whole house could be destroyed by a bulldozer. Since time was so limited, and it's not like they could ask for another take, the filmmakers used 3 cameras for the demolition scene. 2 cameras locked down with prime lenses, and 1 camera with a zoom lens, operated by the cinematographer, Andrew Palermo. As for the interior shot of when the destruction begins, they had the camera in a crash box with the crew looking at monitors, safely outside. And speaking of camera, A Ghost Story was mostly shot on the Arri Alexa Mini, so it's a digital film, but I can't help but notice grain in the images. Perhaps the grain was added in during post. Visually, the first thing that stands out with The Ghost Story is its aspect ratio. Not only did Lowery frame it in a 4:3 ratio, he also put a vignette around the frame, rounding its corners. Was there a purpose to this? Or was it just some stupid artistic gimmick? Lowery chose the 4:3 ratio because he wanted to express a feeling of being trapped. He wanted the ghost to be trapped within the box of this aspect ratio, as he is trapped within the walls of his house. There's also an element of nostalgia to using this ratio, and the vignettes on the corners heighten that nostalgia, making the film look kind of like an old photograph. The rounded corners also bring attention to the aspect ratio and the framing of the film, so the audience is consciously aware of the framing, and thus, the claustrophobia of the situation. If the film had been shot in widescreen ratio, it would have given the frames too much space, too much freedom. It would have gone against the themes of the film. The 4:3 ratio also, in my opinion, heightens the intimacy of many of the scenes, especially the scenes with both Affleck and Mara. It's an aspect ratio that lends itself to close-ups for sure, even though Lowery and Palermo held off on overusing close-ups in the film. They had an idea initially to shoot most of the scenes as medium or long shots, but during the shoot they started to add in close-ups to avoid creating an overly clinical feeling to the movie. The most famous scene from the movie is done as a medium shot. You all know what I'm talking about. Yep, the 4-minute long shot of Rooney Mara eating an entire pie. It's a breathtaking scene. Mara's acting is captivating, and the scene just breaks your heart. Some people think that this scene is super slow. If you're one of those people, go watch Satan Tango and then come back to me. But seriously, go watch Satan Tango. I love it. It's great. That pie that Rooney Mara ate was the first pie that she ever had in her life. And get this, it was a vegan low-sugar chocolate pie. Honestly, no wonder she threw up at the end. I don't think I could have made it 2 bites in. That's how you know that she's a great actress. And in that shot, the ghost just stands over her, watching her the whole time. But is he? In reality, the ghost was never shot in a scene with the humans. No, the ghost was shot separately and then composited into the frames with the people. And not only that, but the ghost and the people were shot at separate frame rates. The people at 24 frames per second and the ghost at 33. This gives the ghost a subtly different motion, a slower motion, just enough to make it feel as if it's not of this world. But the ghost is of this world, isn't it? It's just some dude with a bedsheet draped over him. I saw him get off that hospital bed. And quick note about that scene. Lowery used a stopwatch to direct that shot, as he wanted Affleck to wait at least 60 seconds before he sat up on the bed. But the ghost costume is simple. It looks like a child's drawing of a ghost, or like one of the kids' ghost costumes from the Charlie Brown movie about the Great Pumpkin. The costume, though, isn't as simple as you might think. To achieve a more rounded look to the top, Affleck had to wear a helmet, and there weren't any bed sheets that were big enough for what was needed, so it's not technically a bed sheet. Another problem they faced with the costume was it keeping its form, so they had to use petticoats underneath the cloth to ensure that the costume's form was consistent throughout the film. Needless to say, it wasn't the most comfortable costume, especially considering the fact that they were shooting this film in the hot Texas heat. But even after they perfected the costume for what they wanted, it still posed a myriad of issues in terms of what they could and couldn't film. It's safe to say that the costume limited Affleck's mobility. He looked fine on camera when he walked slowly, but not so when he ran, because to avoid tripping over the cloth, he would have to sort of bunny hop around when he wanted to move quickly. It looks silly. Let's be real for a second here. With this costume, a lot could look silly. So Lowery had to walk a tightrope when dealing with how the ghost acted. Too much movement and the film becomes a comedy. Too little movement and the ghost becomes a prop. So Lowery decided that the film wouldn't show the ghost entrances and exits and halted his mobility in a lot of the scenes. But he did show occasions of the ghost walking and interacting with the environment. The fact that we don't see the ghost enter scenes actually adds to its ethereal mood. And there's surprisingly a lot of emotion with the way the ghost moves his head. The eyes are cut slightly diagonally, giving it a melancholy expression. It's a cold sadness that envelops the whole character of the ghost. And as the film progresses, the ghost sheets get dirtier and dirtier. There were 3 costumes used in the film, each marked by a level of dirtiness. As time passes, the dirt builds up on the sheets, which is crazy because this is a ghost we're talking about. There's no way real dirt could get on a ghost. Here's how I see it, and I could be wrong, but as time passes, the ghost becomes more and more tied to that plot of land. As a human, he didn't want to leave the house, and as a ghost, he's stuck in the house. The dirt building on him is like earth shackling him to that place. And the only key to those shackles is the note his wife left in the wall. What does the note say? No one knows. Lowery told Rooney to write something meaningful on the paper, and then they put it in the hole in the wall. It stayed there until the house was destroyed. No one else read the note, and the note that they used for the over-the-shoulder shots was just a blank piece of paper. But what said on it doesn't matter. In fact, its impact would be lessened if we knew what was written. And when he reads the note, the ghost vanishes. The sheets fall to the floor, serving as the only remnant of the ghost in this world. The technique that they used to achieve this effect was based on the vanishing lady magic trick that magicians use on stage. Weirdly enough, there were actually magicians on set who did these practical effects, one of whom played as the pioneer father. Speaking of the pioneer scene, they shot that whole sequence over the course of 24 hours, but had much less time to shoot it as they were contending with thunderstorms. They can only shoot in between storms and downpours, so they had about 15 to 20 minute intervals to get the shots that they needed. The only lighting that they used was the fire and the lightning. Ellipses are used frequently in the movie to move the ghost from one time or place to another, and it's this kind of editing that gives the film a rather hypnotic rhythm and allows the passage of time to slip between our fingers. The script was much different than the final film. This is normal for movies. Lowery wrote the first 10 pages as being heavy with dialogue between Affleck and Mara, but during the shoot, Affleck suggested shooting a scene on the couch, and that ended up becoming the first scene. Most of the dialogue scenes were either cut or repurposed for the final act. We also don't see the relationship between the 2 main characters in a chronological way. And you know who you can thank for that? Shane Carruth, the absolute legend. If you haven't seen Upstream Color or Primer, well, then go see them. Carruth advised Lowery to cut intuitively, not rationally. So Lowery cut the film by feeling, allowing the film to progress emotionally rather than chronologically, which definitely creates a better experience for the viewer in the sense that we feel the buildup of emotion over the course of the film. But also, the fact that it's not in order plays right into how the ghost perceives time. This is a case of a film essentially being rewritten in post-production. Although, that's kinda true for most films. And as I said earlier, Lowery allowed actors to add to the script. He'd write dialogue, but always encourage actors to say their lines in the most natural way possible. So if they needed to change around a few words, that was fine. One actor didn't, and that was Will Oldham, the prognosticator, who has more dialogue in the film than anyone else. And his scene has become the most controversial. Some people think it fits, and some people think it ruins the film and explains everything too easily. Lowery wrote his speech long before he wrote the script to the film, which may explain why it does feel different than the rest of the movie. He did try cutting out the scene, but said that the film became too vaporous, that there wasn't much to latch onto, so he put the scene back in. Funny story about the scene. You might notice an appearance by Kesha. Lowery wanted the extras dancing to a Kesha song during the party, and she heard about it. 2 days later, she was on set and in front of the camera. But anyways, Lowery saw the scene as something tangible to give to the audience, not as something that easily explains the film. How could it explain the ghost's relationship to his wife, his feelings, the cosmos? No, it doesn't really explain that. And you're reading the film entirely wrong if you think everything in the movie is summed up in this one monologue. It's more of a prelude to the next segment. Think about it. He talks about hammering in a fence post, and what do we see immediately in the Pioneer scene? A man hammering in a fence post. And he talks about creating a song, that after the fall of humanity, someone hums its melody. And what happens in the Pioneer scene? The little girl hums the melody to Affleck's character's song, I Get Overwhelmed. Which means that in this scene, he's not in the past, but in the far future. That perhaps, in this world, time is cyclical and everything is starting over again, with a faint knowledge of the previous cycle. But again, that wasn't written into the script. A guy who was working in the marketing department of A24 thought that she was humming the melody, and Lowery loved the idea so much that he brought the actress in to record her humming that melody. It became intentional, but after they finished shooting the film. And for anyone curious, the song is I Get Overwhelmed by Dark Rooms. It just so happens that the lead of Dark Rooms is Daniel Hart, the composer for the movie. He gifted the song to Lowery while he was still writing the script. While making the soundtrack, Hart used programs to exponentially lengthen bits of the song to use as background music. But for other parts of the score, he created music based off the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Old Testament verses, and more. Okay, I need to start wrapping things up. So, some quick factaroonies. The other ghost was played by the director, David Lowery. The subtitles between the ghosts weren't written in the script, but decided upon in post. The most expensive shots in the film were the shots where Affleck was shirtless, as they had to digitally remove his tattoos. The scene with the kids in the bed looking at the door was inspired by The Conjuring 2. Yeah, you heard that right. The following scene, where the ghost breaks the plates, was inspired by Poltergeist. For an art film, it sure has some mainstream influences. And what about the movie A Ghost Story Could Have Been? Lowery initially wanted to make a horror movie, where the ghost wore a sheet like he does in this movie, but he'd make it as scary as it could be. Well, I'm glad he didn't make that movie. If you like this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video.
Did you guys hear that too?